Marine Sergeant Larry Kirby lived to share his extraordinary story despite experiencing intense battles in places like Banaka, Guam, and Iwo Jima. One day that remains etched in his memory is March 12, 1945, when his unit, Easy Company of the 9th Marines, 3rd Marine Division, attempted to advance uphill to a strategic location known as Hill 362C in the northeastern region of Iwo Jima. The mission was carried out under the cover of darkness. The day before, Easy Company, along with 3 other companies from the 3rd Marine Division, had received orders to infiltrate enemy lines and eliminate a high ground position that the Japanese were using as an observation post. The division's command was growing impatient with the slow progress against the well-fortified Japanese positions and wanted to take more decisive action. Hill 362C, as it was marked on Marine Corps maps, became their target. Kirby carried his trusted Thompson submachine gun along with extra stick magazines loaded with .45 caliber rounds. He also had an additional M1 carbine strapped to his back. Before the mission, he and his fellow Marines were instructed to shed all unnecessary gear, taking only their weapons, ammunition, water, and a few rations in their pockets. To avoid making noise, Kirby even wrapped a sock around his canteen chain to keep it from rattling. At 3:30 a.m., the 4 companies assembled and moved forward after receiving a silent signal, just a simple nudge. They advanced in single file, each Marine keeping contact with the soldier ahead by touch as they moved cautiously through the dark. In the past 4 days, their progress had been slow, advancing only 40 to 50 yards per day. But on this morning, the column quickly covered over 200 yards. Upon reaching the high ground, the 4 companies split up. Easy and Fox companies veered eastward to attack from the right, while the other 2 units moved northeast to strike from the left. Kirby recalled thinking the strategy seemed unlikely to work, but to his surprise, it was working. Suddenly, a parachute flare burst in the sky, illuminating the area. Their stealth had been compromised. In an instant, enemy machine guns roared to life, cutting into the Marines. As the bullets rained down, about 100 men from Easy and Fox companies scrambled into a shallow depression in the earth for cover. Kirby found himself near the eastern wall of this natural quarry, surrounded by towering rock formations. The Japanese had likely been using the quarry to extract stones for their defensive fortifications. From the western wall, an enemy machine gun nest, positioned at the mouth of a cave, unleashed devastating fire. Kirby scanned the battlefield. To the north, there was nothing, no place to take cover. To the south, enemy machine guns they had bypassed earlier in the darkness were now opening fire on them. Trapped with nowhere to go, the Marines attempted to form fire teams, but the chaotic situation made it impossible. With no other choice, they fought for survival on their own. Realizing the enemy held the high ground and had a strategic advantage, Kirby focused on one goal: staying alive. He fired whenever he could, using fallen Marines' ammunition when his own ran low. When his Thompson was empty, he scavenged for another .45 caliber weapon. Over the next 38 hours, Kirby did whatever it took to survive, taking sips of water when he could, maneuvering under fire, and engaging the enemy. The area would later be known as Cushman's Pocket, named after Colonel Robert Cushman, commander of the 9th Marine Regiment. Like many young men of his generation, Kirby felt a strong call to serve after the attack on Pearl Harbor. As a 17-year-old from Brookline, Massachusetts, he was eager to enlist. He chose the Marine Corps simply because he preferred their uniform over the other branches. However, as a minor, he needed parental consent. His parents persuaded him to wait until his 18th birthday before joining. Once he turned 18, he enlisted and was sent to Marine Corps Recruit Depot at Parris Island, South Carolina, where he endured the grueling 12-week boot camp. After completing basic training, he attended advanced infantry training at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, where he was trained as a reconnaissance scout. From there, he was sent to San Pedro, California, for amphibious assault training. By the summer of 1943, he was deployed to the Pacific, arriving at Guadalcanal. Assigned to Easy Company, 9th Marines, 3rd Marine Division, he spent months training on the jungle-covered island, preparing for battle with simulated exercises at the fire team, squad, and platoon levels. Despite Guadalcanal being a well-known battlefield from the previous year to Kirby, it felt like just another training ground. The Marines followed strict training routines, repeating attack maneuvers dozens of times until they became second nature. Kirby explained that they would drill a technique 25 to 30 times, then another 50 times, ensuring it became automatic, pure muscle memory. As a reconnaissance scout, Kirby had a choice between carrying an M1 carbine or a Thompson submachine gun. He preferred the Thompson because the length of the carbine felt awkward to him. He had hoped to find a folding stock version of the carbine, a weapon often used by paratroopers, but they were extremely rare. He likened the chances of finding one to finding vanilla ice cream on Guadalcanal. Armed and ready, Kirby and his fellow Marines were assigned their first major invasion, a mission to capture the Japanese-held island of Bougainville at the northernmost edge of the Solomon Islands. As part of the island-hopping campaign, securing Bougainville's airstrip was a critical objective. The night before the invasion, Kirby could hardly sleep. Anxiety and uncertainty filled his mind as he lay awake, knowing what lay ahead. To pass the time, he and a few fellow Marines gathered at the back of their transport ship, talking quietly as they prepared for battle. At 4:30 a.m. on November 1, 1943, the Marines began their descent down the side of the ship, climbing down cargo nets into Higgins boats. As they approached the shore, Japanese gunners opened fire. Kirby vividly remembered the moment, admitting, "I was scared to death. We all were. We were just kids." Once they landed, the Marines launched their assault, pushing into the dense jungle and eliminating enemy resistance. The thick vegetation made movement nearly impossible. If there was no clear trail, they had to hack their way through. The situation was made worse by relentless rain, which turned the terrain into a swamp, making roads impassable. Through every battle, Kirby and his fellow Marines endured extreme hardships, pushing forward with determination. His story is one of courage, resilience, and survival, memories that he carried with him for the rest of his life. The Marines gradually expanded their position on the beach before securing the crucial airfield. By mid-December, Army soldiers took over, allowing the 3rd Marine Division to return to Guadalcanal. Kirby's first experience in combat was in Bougainville, and he remembered it as a brutal and bloody ordeal. He recalled seeing the first fallen Marine and described it as a horrifying experience, leaving him with no fond memories of Bougainville. After recovering from combat, the 3rd Marine Division began preparations for their next mission in the island-hopping campaign. In June 1944, Kirby set sail for the Mariana Islands. On June 15, the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions launched an attack on Saipan, while Kirby and the rest of the 3rd Marine Division remained on ships offshore as a reserve force. As Marines and Army soldiers from the 27th Infantry Division battled for control of Saipan, the 3rd Marine Division remained in reserve for 5 weeks. Reflecting on this time at sea, Kirby said it was an enjoyable cruise, though there was always the awareness that once they disembarked, they would face a difficult battle. The 3rd Marine Division never deployed to Saipan, and by July 9, American forces had taken control of the island. After completing resupply operations in Eniwataka Atoll, the 3rd Marine Division moved to the southern Mariana Islands in preparation for the invasion of Guam. Kirby and 8 other scouts from his battalion were assigned a special task. On July 21, 3 teams, each consisting of 3 scouts and an officer, landed at Asen Beach ahead of the main invasion force. This was a lesson learned from the Bougainville invasion. Their mission was to place canvas markers on the beach to guide incoming troops safely and speed up their landing. Kirby laughed as he recalled the simplicity of the assignment, which required them to land, move inland, and redirect troops away from any defensive positions that could put them at risk. Kirby and the other scouts boarded an amphibious landing vehicle equipped with tank treads to cross the reefs surrounding the beach. As they approached, naval guns pounded the island, and aircraft carried out bombing runs. Watching the shells hit their targets, Kirby couldn't help but feel excited. The heavy enemy guns held their fire, not wanting to reveal their positions and draw retaliation from the naval fleet. Only sporadic small arms fire came from the beach, but one scout was killed as he climbed out of the landing craft. Kirby quickly set up the markers and scouted enemy positions, an effort that significantly reduced casualties during the main landing. Shortly after, the first wave of the 3rd Marine Division landed on Asen Beach and began pushing inland, destroying Japanese fortifications. 5 days later, Marines had extended their perimeter about a mile from the beach to the base of Fonte Ridge, a strategically important high ground that overlooked the American position. On the night of July 25, around 3,000 Japanese troops launched a massive banzai charge from the ridge. Kirby, positioned at the front, recalled how suddenly they appeared in overwhelming numbers. For a moment, it seemed impossible to stop them as they charged straight through Marine lines. Some Japanese troops even breached the American defenses all the way to the shore, storming a field hospital where they killed patients and medical staff with bayonets. The attack lasted for about an hour before the Marines managed to reorganize and counterattack. Once order was restored, they began searching for wounded American troops. Kirby was stunned by the enemy's willingness to sacrifice themselves. It seemed like they had no intention of anything other than dying in battle. One moment from the attack remained vivid in his memory. A young Japanese soldier, who Kirby estimated to be about 16 years old, charged downhill holding explosives. He was about 30 yards away when Marine gunfire struck him, knocking him down. Despite being hit, the young soldier kept getting back up, attempting to reach his target before being shot again. It took 6 or 7 hits before he finally stayed down. Even then, wounded and barely able to move, the soldier tried to crawl toward an American rifle before being fatally shot. Kirby couldn't help but admire his determination. Kirby continued his role as a reconnaissance scout throughout the battle for Guam. Several days a week, just before dawn, he would set out alone, dressed in jungle camouflage with grease paint on his face, moving ahead of the front line. His job was to gather intelligence on enemy positions and estimate the size of their forces. He would then relay his findings to his captain, who reported them to the regiment. By analyzing the positioning of enemy sentries, he could determine the size of the unit and predict its movements. The information scouts provided played a crucial role in shaping battle plans. On one scouting mission, Kirby cautiously navigated the dense jungle when he suddenly locked eyes with a Japanese soldier just 20 feet away. Both froze, neither willing to make the first move. The enemy soldier held an Arisaka rifle in a high-ready position, aiming slightly upward. For what felt like an eternity, they remained motionless. Then, in an instant, the Japanese soldier made his move, lowering his weapon and pulling the trigger. Kirby instinctively dropped to the ground, causing the shot to miss. As he prepared to fire his Thompson submachine gun, he heard the distinct metallic sound of a grenade being armed against the steel helmet. The grenade landed behind him, forcing him to dive forward and fire at the soldier in quick bursts. The explosion knocked Kirby to the ground. When he looked up, he saw the Japanese soldier he had shot leaning lifelessly against a tree. The reality of the one-on-one encounter deeply affected him. While he felt relieved to be alive, he was also burdened by the fact that he had taken another life. As he searched through the soldier's belongings, he found a Japanese flag covered in family autographs. Before leaving, he gently returned the flag to the soldier. He also found a photograph, which he placed inside the liner of his own helmet, not as a keepsake, but as a way to honor the man he had killed. After the war, he kept the photo in his wallet for over 70 years. During a later patrol in a coconut grove with fellow Marines from Easy Company, Kirby experienced one of the war's most unexpected moments. As they moved through rows of palm trees, a Japanese gun opened fire, forcing them to take cover. The trees offered little protection, so the Marines pressed themselves as thinly as possible against the trunks. Kirby recalled realizing they would have to make a run for it. Nearby, his comrade George Christie stood awkwardly behind a tree. He pointed toward the thick jungle surrounding the grove and shouted to Kirby that they should escape in that direction. Just as he extended his hand, a bullet tore through his wrist. Kirby saw the pain on his friend's face and quickly moved to help him. Christie, despite his injury, managed to joke through the pain. He said he was just grateful he hadn't been caught in a more embarrassing moment. Kirby admired his ability to find humor even in the face of suffering. By August 10, 1944, The battle for Guam had ended after 21 days of intense fighting. Kirby took great pride in helping to reclaim U.S. territory and free the native people. However, there was little time for rest. The division quickly resumed training for their next mission. The Marines were always on the move, with little chance to pause and reflect. Over the next few months, training focused on physical endurance rather than specialized combat skills. At first, Kirby and his fellow Marines didn't know their next target, but it soon became clear they were headed for a small island called Iwo Jima. Looking at a map of the Pacific, Kirby understood why the island was so important. A round trip from the Mariana Islands to Japan was about 3,000 miles, making the Midway airfield essential. B-29 Superfortress bombers had been using airstrips across the Marianas to attack Japan, and Iwo Jima sat right in the middle. It was clear that the island had to be taken. Unlike previous battles, Kirby would not be serving as a scout. On Iwo Jima, there was no need to search for the enemy. They were everywhere. Japanese General Tadamichi Kurabayashi had spent months preparing for the invasion, knowing the island's strategic importance. He had fortified the island with an extensive network of bunkers, pillboxes, and artillery positions. Hidden gun emplacements, mortar tubes, machine guns, and sniper nests covered the island. The shoreline was heavily mined, and though American intelligence had identified many of these defenses, they had failed to uncover the true extent of the Japanese tunnel system. Deep underground, 5 levels below the surface, Kurabayashi's headquarters connected to a vast tunnel network that stretched for miles. These tunnels allowed Japanese forces to move undetected and ensured that their gunners always had a steady supply of ammunition. At the southwestern tip of the island, Mount Shirabachi, an extinct volcano standing 550 feet tall, was riddled with tunnels and stairwells, giving the Japanese the advantage of elevation. Despite months of American bombing, the defenses remained largely intact. In February 1945, 3 Marine divisions set sail for Iwo Jima. The 4th and 5th Divisions landed first on February 19, while the 3rd Division remained offshore in reserve. Kirby found it hard to believe that such a small island, just 8 square miles, required an invasion force of 40,000 men. Many Marines expected the battle to last only a few days, believing there were just 9,000 Japanese defenders. However, the intelligence reports were wrong. The actual number was closer to 21,000, and the fight for Iwo Jima would last 36 days. On February 23, elements of the 3rd Division, including Kirby's unit, finally landed. As he walked past the wreckage of landing boats, tanks, and burned-out vehicles, he could see how fierce the earlier battles had been. The landscape was nothing like Guam or Bougainville. Instead of jungles, the volcanic island was barren and lifeless. Kirby described it as looking like a flat pool table, except for the towering presence of Mount Shirabachi. For 4 days, the 4th and 5th Divisions struggled to make progress. As Kirby and his unit advanced from the beach, they came under fire from multiple directions. With little cover, they were forced to either sprint for safety or press themselves against the black volcanic sand, hoping to avoid enemy fire. Kirby had no secure position, as every region was under fire at some point. There was no safe vantage point. Around 11 in the morning, as he was looking out from the U.S. line, a Marine pointed and told him to look. He turned onto his back and saw Marines circling the crest of Mount Shirabachi. As he watched, the flag of the United States was raised and spread out in the wind. At the time, it didn't hold any special meaning for him, even though the event would later become a defining moment in Marine Corps and Pacific War history. In reality, it simply meant they would no longer take fire from behind. Progress was painfully slow and came at a high cost. The Marines had to fight for every yard they gained. Easy Company had 225 soldiers when they landed, but after 12 days of combat, only 73 remained. Fox Company, which fought alongside them, suffered similar losses. Although they had trained as a company, a platoon, and a squad, the staggering casualties had completely broken their unit cohesion. Kirby recalled that they had become ineffective. When the Japanese heard the approaching Marines, they launched parachute flares, opened fire, and forced the battered companies to retreat. Divisional command brought the survivors together and assigned them a new mission: sneak through Japanese defenses under cover of darkness, and take Hill 362C. Over the next 36 hours, Kirby and about 100 Marines found themselves trapped inside what was known as Cushman's pocket, fighting desperately to survive. He dreaded the arrival of daylight because the Japanese, positioned around the pocket's perimeter, had the advantage. At night, the Marines could at least conceal their movements and catch brief moments of rest. A few Marines tried to escape by crawling through rock heaps and depressions, but vigilant Japanese gunners wiped them out. The Marines fired relentlessly to prevent the enemy from overwhelming their position. When a mortar round landed near Kirby, the explosion knocked him off his feet, and a rock tore into his back. Though wounded, he continued fighting. The Japanese soldiers were so close that he could hear them taunting the Marines during pauses in gunfire. He dug in, moved, and fired whenever he could. Several hours into the battle, despite being starving, he forced himself to eat one of his rations. During the chaos, Kirby witnessed a Marine from Fox Company trying to escape when an explosion cost him both legs. The brutal fight raged on, hour after hour. While the Marines held off the Japanese infantry, reinforcements finally reached their position after a day and a half. 2 Sherman tanks arrived. Kirby remembered one with a short, stubby barrel, probably a flamethrower. The Japanese, knowing the deadly threat of a flamethrower, didn't fire at it. Another Sherman tank rolled into the quarry near Kirby's position while another provided cover. As the driver pressed the tank's tread against a rock, raising the bottom of the vehicle slightly, he called out to Kirby and a few other Marines. They crawled under the Sherman and climbed up through a hatch near the bow gunner's seat. The tank pulled them out of the pocket and returned behind American lines. Once aboard, they managed to rescue 4 Marines from Fox Company and 7 from Easy Company. Out of the 100 trapped Marines, only 11 survived. Kirby was one of the few who made it out of Cushman's pocket alive. He credited his survival to lessons he had learned fighting on Guam and Bougainville. On the morning of March 12, the survivors of Easy and Fox Companies were taken to a sandbag bunker and given breakfast. He recalled that they simply sat in silence, staring at each other, unable to speak. After his back wound was treated, he was told to go to the beach and board a ship bound for the Mariana Islands. Weary and shattered by the events of the past 36 hours, Kirby broke down in tears, mourning his fallen friends. Once the landing craft arrived, he left the island. Shortly after his rescue, fresh Marines were sent in to neutralize Hill 362C. The battle for the pocket continued for 4 more days. By March 16, all Japanese resistance in the area had been eliminated, and the Marines secured the hill. Its capture paved the way for the final assault on northern Iwo Jima. The last Japanese forces were wiped out on March 26. The battle for Iwo Jima lasted 36 days and came at a devastating cost. A total of 5,931 Marines and 209 Navy corpsmen lost their lives. Almost the entire Japanese force was wiped out, with only 216 of the 21,000 Japanese soldiers taken alive. After recovering on Guam, Kirby began preparing for the planned invasion of Japan. He learned that 100 Japanese divisions were waiting to defend their homeland. He knew his luck would eventually run out, and if the invasion happened, he would almost certainly die. However, on August 13, his battalion's communications center received an encrypted message stating that the Japanese Foreign Office had contacted Switzerland to arrange a surrender. News spread quickly through the division. Kirby described it as waiting for the final lottery number to be drawn while holding 5 winning tickets. On August 15, Japan's surrender was officially announced, ending the war. Kirby recalled it as the happiest day of his life. At the time, no one fully understood the impact of the atomic bombings the week before. They had heard about the bombings, but didn't grasp their true scale. To return home to Brookline, Massachusetts, he boarded a landing ship tank. After 3.5 years away, he arrived home in a taxicab at 8 p.m. on Christmas Eve, 1945. Snow was falling, and Christmas carols played in the background. It was like a scene from a Norman Rockwell painting. When he rang the doorbell, his sister answered. "Hey, I'm home," he said. After returning to Boston, Kirby wasted no time in settling down. 2 weeks later, he enrolled at Emerson College, where he met Mary Crane. Just 8 weeks after their first date, they eloped to New York and were married on April 11, 1946. He reflected on his experiences, saying that on Iwo Jima, he came to understand the true meaning of love. The young Marines there sacrificed their lives for their families and friends because they loved them. That lesson stayed with him for the rest of his life. In 2021, he and Mary celebrated their 75th wedding anniversary. Looking back on his time in the war, he made an astonishing statement. Being on Iwo Jima was the best thing that ever happened.